Hi, it's Dr. Kristy Goodwin, and welcome back to Spacious Success. I have a quick question before we start. When you are not working, when you are genuinely resting, when absolutely nothing needs your attention, how does that feel? It's uncomfortable. For a lot of women that I work with, the honest answer is grossly uncomfortable, even guilty. And here is the thing. That discomfort, it's not a time management problem. It's not a boundaries issue. It's an identity problem. And today I want to show you exactly what I mean. By the end of this episode, you will understand why so many high-achieving women cannot stop, even when they desperately want to. You'll recognize yourself in the research, and you will have one practical shift, hopefully, that you can start making this week. So let's get into it. Hi, I'm Dr. Kristy Goodwin, a Neuro-Performance scientist, speaker, and executive coach who learned the hard way that chasing success can come at a cost. After burnout landed me in hospital, I made it my mission to help ambitious women who are done trading their health and happiness for high performance. On Spacious Success, I share science-backed strategies and real stories to help you flourish as a female at work and beyond, so you can stop paying the success tax. A few years ago, I was delivering a keynote for a financial services firm. The room was filled with brilliant people, senior leaders, women, the kind of women who have navigated nearly every obstacle that the corporate world has placed in front of them and kept going. And at the end, a woman came up to me. She had been crying during one of the slides, quietly trying not to be seen. She told me she'd just been promoted again, and that her career was going exactly to plan, that from the outside, everything was perfect. And then she said, I don't actually know who I am when I'm not working. I tried to take a week off in Bali last year. I had a panic attack by day 3. Not because anything was wrong, but because I was doing nothing. I have heard versions of that story hundreds of times from women and men at the peak of their careers, but especially from women who have built businesses and positions from nothing, from women who have every structural reason to finally slow down and who find that they just simply cannot. We tend to pathologize this. We call it workaholism. We call it burnout waiting to happen. We tell women meditate more, delegate better, book a holiday, have a bubble bath. But what if the problem is not the workload? What if something older, deeper, and far more interesting is causing this? And here's what I have started to call it, the doer identity. The identity that your worth is not just tied to what you produce, but that at your core, you are defined by doing itself. Now, before we get into the research, I want to ask you something. Are you also the eldest daughter in your family? Now, I ask this because this year at a Commonwealth Bank Elevate Leadership Conference, a CEO named Ruth Limkin from the Banyans Healthcare business asked a question in a room full of senior women leaders. Around 85% of women in their room put their hands up when they were asked, are they also the oldest daughter? And that number has stayed with me ever since I read about this, because it's not a coincidence. I often think it's a pattern, and the research is beginning to explain exactly why we might be seeing this. In 2026, researchers called Varma and Petrogili published a study in the Organizational Behaviour and Human Decision Processes journal that I think is one of the most important pieces of research that I have read in this space. They spent 29 months in an inductive study of 43 knowledge workers, the kind of professionals who work excessively and cannot explain why. And what they found was not what most people expect. These workers were not overworking because of pressure or deadlines from above. They were not overworking because of poor systems or bad managers. They were overworking because of their identity, their sense of self, who was built around the sheer act of doing itself. Not the outcomes, not the achievement, not the accolades, just around the doing. The researchers called this the doer identity, a personal identity that's defined by action, independent of any results. And they found, interestingly, that this was constructed in childhood, often as a response to caregivers who placed excessive demands on their children, either implicitly or explicitly. And this is where it gets interesting. The researchers identified 3 distinct types of doer identity, each with its own childhood origin. The first one was the conforming doer. This person learned as a child that their self-worth was conditional on meeting implicit expectations. They internalized the idea that being good, capable, useful was how you earned love and safety. At work, they're often the person who cannot say no, who takes on everybody else's problems, and who deeply and uncomfortably sits with conflict. But here's the challenging part. Conforming doers often unconsciously pressure their direct reports to do the same and emulate their behaviour. The second is the dissociative doer. This person grew up in more of an oppressive or an unstable family environment, and they learn to protect themselves emotionally by disconnecting. They work relentlessly, but they feel no joy. And when things get difficult, they withdraw, retreat. They are the high performers who look invulnerable from the outside, but feel just curiously, endlessly empty. And the third is the reflexive doer. This person was raised with very explicit demands for recognition, academic achievement, visible success, being the best. And at work, they're often most driven, the most likely to shield their team from pressure, while privately driving themselves into the ground. They can describe the pattern perfectly. They just can't stop. And I wonder, do any of these resonate? Here is what I find really fascinating about this research. The authors found that the very thing that make these doers, these people effective, was also the very thing destroying them. The doer identity worked in childhood. It got them praised, it got them awards, accolades, love and safety. But in adulthood, it's become this self-reinforcing trap. The more we do, the more our identity requires us to do. And critically, this is the finding that should concern every organisation. The researchers found that the standard workplace interventions consistently failed to address this. Email curfews, digital guardrails, flexible work, wellness programs, EAPs, leadership development. All of these operate on an assumption that the problem is external. They don't touch the force that's actually driving the behaviour. Now, let's go back to the eldest daughter concept. The women's agenda piece that prompted the Elevate conference observation that was published in June 2026 explored what is being called the eldest daughter syndrome. Now, this is not a clinical diagnosis, but a pattern so consistent that it's often impossible to ignore. Eldest daughters are typically the ones who become responsible early. They manage siblings, they are praised for being mature and capable, who learn that competence is their currency. Sound familiar? That is almost precisely the origin story conforming the doer identity. Ruth Limkin, who raised the question at the conference, said it clearly. Our identity can become woven into our responsibility. When that happens, rest doesn't feel like recovery. It actually feels like a threat. In the research, every single one of the 43 participants described their excessive working as constitutional, as simply just who they are, rather than as a choice or as a response to any sort of pressure. That's not a workload problem. That's an identity problem, and it has neuroscience behind it. When your identity is built on a bedrock of doing, your nervous system experiences rest as a threat. Your threat detection systems, the same systems designed to keep you safe from physical danger, are activated by inactivity. The cortisol does not spike because you are in danger. It spikes because your constructed self, your doer identity, does not know how to exist without a task or a to-do list. This is what I see in my coaching clients consistently. Women who can describe exactly what they need to do differently, who completely understand the logic of recovery, who genuinely want to slow down, but whose nervous systems will not let them. This is not laziness in reverse. It is a very sophisticated, very logical, very deeply embodied identity structure that was built to protect us. And we have not learned that you no longer need that protection. So, what do you do with this? What can you do if you resonate with the doer identity? I want to be honest with you. If you are carrying a doer identity, it's not a one week fix. The research is clear on that. Tailored coaching, reflective work, nervous system regulation are some of the interventions, and there's some evidence behind them. If you are working with a coach or a therapist, I would take this episode to your next session or send it to them and use it as a starting point. But I think there are 3 things that you could start doing right now to begin to loosen your grip on this identity. The first is to name your type. Go back. What are those 3 profiles? Conforming, dissociative, or reflexive? Which one fits you? Most of us are a blend, but one will feel more familiar. It's the one that we often revert to when we're feeling stressed or overwhelmed. Now, naming it matters because it shifts the story. Instead of saying, I am someone who cannot stop working, I'm a workaholic, the story becomes, I am someone whose childhood brain learned that stopping was unsafe. That's, I think, a really different starting point. The second is to practice being rather than doing. I do not mean meditation, although if that works for you, excellent, go ahead. I mean choosing one space in your life, 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, an hour, where you deliberately have no task, no to-do list, no output, not as rest as recovery from doing. Rest is just existing. Now, this will feel deeply uncomfortable at first. That discomfort is your data. It shows you exactly how tightly your doer identity is running. Now, your job is not to eliminate the discomfort. Your job is to sit with it long enough for your nervous system to learn that nothing bad happens when you simply stop. And the third is to separate your performance from your identity at the micro level. This is the one that I use mostly with my coaching clients. The question is simple. Right now, is what I am about to do something that I genuinely need to do or something that my identity needs me to do? Not every task, not every day, but just use this as a regular check-in. It will create a gap between the impulse to do something and the decision to act. And that gap is where your agency lives. And for the eldest daughters listening in the room, the ones that have been responsible since they were old enough to hold or bath their siblings, I want to offer you one more reframe. The capability that made you invisible, or so I should say invaluable as a child, is real. It's yours. Nobody can take it from you. But you are allowed to perform it because you choose to, not because your identity demands it. Capability is a gift, not a debt. And that, I think, we need to distinguish. So today, as we wrap up, here is your reframe for the next week. You may not be addicted to being busy. You have perhaps built an identity to survive. And now you get to decide if that identity still serves you or enslaves you. The research does not tell us that we need to stop being driven. It does not say that our ambition is a problem. It says that the suffering that comes when you have no sense of self left when you stop doing. Spacious success is not the absence of ambition. It's that your ambition does not require your full identity as your fuel. This week's power up moment is to choose one single moment where you stop before you feel ready to stop, where you sit with the discomfort of not doing anything. 30 seconds, enough to just notice what arises. This is your doer identity recognizing itself. In the next episode, we will have another guest episode where we will share what success really looks like behind closed doors, what you don't see online. And then in our next solo episode, we're going somewhere that I suspect that will resonate with you deeply, particularly if you are in your late 30s or 40s, or if the last few years have felt like your brain has quietly changed gears without letting you know. We'll be talking about ADHD, perimenopause collision. What's actually happening neurobiologically? Why this isn't a personal failure on your behalf? And why so many brilliant women are being told that they are fine when they are anything but. Until then, remember you were not born to overwork. You were trained to do so. And training can change. I'm Dr. Kristy Goodwin. Thank you for tuning in to Spacious Success.